"So, how much was your mother's inheritance?" I was taken aback by Bob's comment. The funeral for my mother had just ended. Without a single word of comfort, he said this to me, clearly feeling down. Maybe he thought about the inheritance because I was looking at a document, but that's just unthinkable. It was about $1 million. Rates $1 million? That's it. But, well, after taxes and all, it's still a couple $100,000, huh? Hearing my reluctant answer, Bob muttered to himself and smirked. What a creepy smile. I don't know what he's thinking, but things won't go his way. However, the next day, Bob quickly put his plans into action. But his naive idea would probably take everything away from him. He hadn't realized that yet. My name is Catherine Mollet. I got married through a matchmaker when I was 20. My husband's name is Bob. He's 5 years older than me, a company employee, and the eldest son of the O'Malley family. However, even though he's the eldest, his younger brother, Mike, had left home after college and cut ties with the family. Because of this, Bob was treated like an only son and was very cherished by his parents. To be honest, I didn't really want to marry Bob. But my family has been running a business for generations. Being in a position often referred to as a rich girl, I couldn't go against my parents' decision. And though I ended up marrying Bob, he probably couldn't refuse either, since his dad also ran a business. It wasn't a marriage based on mutual feelings. It was far from a happy married life. Added to make things worse, we couldn't have children. Since we married young, it was hard to give up on having kids. I thought if we had a child, things might get better. But despite medical treatment, it didn't happen. Hey, Baron, did you finish cleaning? At first, my in-laws, who once cherished me as their family, started calling me Baron after a few years. You wouldn't need to go to the doctor if you did things right. What a waste of money. My father-in-law would make sarcastic remarks every day. And even though he knew about it, Bob never stood up for me. He'd just lay there reading the newspaper or taking a nap, snoring loudly. Oh, and when I said I wanted to start working for a change of pace, he said, people would think we were struggling if you went to work. True, back then, it was common for women to become housewives after marriage. But living alone with my mother-in-law was honestly a daily nightmare. 70 beatings, nobody would help. I couldn't talk to my parents because I didn't want to worry them, and I couldn't leave because it was a marriage of convenience. But I believed things would eventually get better. I believed I would be rewarded for enduring all of this one day. However, things never got better. Many years after our marriage, when I turned 40, my father-in-law passed away in an accident. It came to light that his company had been evading taxes. All assets were seized to cover back taxes and fines, and the company went bankrupt. But the substantial life insurance on my father-in-law was also used for this. We managed to keep the house, but our comfortable life was over. At 45, I thought it might be tough for Bob to find a new job, but my parents introduced him to one. Thanks to that, he found work quickly, but my mother-in-law aged drastically and seemed like a mere shell of her former self. For a while, she didn't even have the energy to make snide remarks at me, which was a relief. But then, she suffered a stroke and needed care. This situation made it impossible for me to even think about trying to have a baby. I was already 40. Deep down, I had kind of given up. But this was the real turning point. Bob naturally expected me to take care of his mother, and on his days off, he just lounged around the house as he used to. "Bob, could you help with your mom's care once in a while?" One day, I mustered the courage to tell him. Even if it's just on weekends or helping with a meal, it would be a huge relief to me. But Bob frowned at my words. "Excuse me? I'm working, you know. Can't I get a break on my days off?" I didn't think he got it, that I didn't even have a day off. This with his father's business gone under and my parents concerned for me, they finally said for me to come back. But what would become of my mother-in-law if I did? We currently have a caregiver come once a week, but I doubt we can afford a daily caregiver. Even though she asked me to work harder and made snide comments, I couldn't abandon her. Bob started to leave the house earlier even on his days off. He said that he felt my disapproving gaze whenever he tried to relax at home. My wife doesn't let me relax even on my days off. I heard the rumor that he started telling our neighbors. And he began taking solo trips to places in the countryside. Our neighbors know about his mother's condition. Yet Bob, knowing that, would openly comment on dumping the caregiving on me. He probably doesn't realize how he comes off. I feel bad for his mother, who he once adored but now avoids since she fell ill. "Because of you, Bob doesn't come to see me." She would say that from time to time. Should I leave then? When I retorted that, she would instantly fall silent. I continued this life for another 20 years, with a long caregiving journey finally ending when my mother-in-law passed, joining her husband. I was approaching 60. I no longer had feelings for Bob, but I had come to terms with the situation. I'd come to terms with many things. At this point, I couldn't just leave, and I guess I'll live out my days in this house. Bob, at least, was diligent in his job. That dedication was recognized, and even after retirement, he received requests to work as senior staff. Thanks to that, I'm able to live as I do now. While we were never close as a couple, I'm grateful for that. Our relationship wasn't great, but Bob never tried to kick me out. He probably thinks it's too late now. He still doesn't want to be home on weekends and goes out, so I get to enjoy my alone time. Recently, I even took up pottery. I made some friends at this age, and for the first time since marriage, I've been enjoying my life. But Bob seems irked by it. He was like, "Well, I'm out working. You're just goofing off." One day, he burnt the bag I used for my pottery class in the backyard. String, what the hell are you doing? Stop being so obsessed with that weird hobby and do some house chores. Inside the bag were pottery materials and my personal items. Even with water, it was too late. Everything was charred. Certainly, anger welled up within me. I thought it might be too late, but the road ahead was long. The word divorce even crossed my mind. But just as I was contemplating that, another misfortune struck me. It was the sudden departure of my parents. My real father passed away unexpectedly from an illness, and just a month after his funeral, my mother too fell ill and followed him. It all happened so suddenly, and I was drowned in sorrow. My father's company was already taken over by my brother Jake. Given the sheer number of mourners at both my father's and mother's funerals, and the busy schedule, I ended up staying in bed for about a week after my mother's funeral. It must have been mental exhaustion. My pottery class friends were considerate enough to check in on me, but only Bob sneered. He was like, "How long are you going to stay in bed?" I was shocked and tired after my mom's funeral too, but I didn't sleep that much. Must be nice for someone without a job to just sleep. It might be a valid point, but it's the worst thing a husband could say to his wife. The very next day, I forced my weary body up and resumed my usual daily routine. I wasn't really in the mood for hobbies, so I did the bare minimum. Bob, always indifferent to my feelings, seemed satisfied with that. Then, a little while after my mother's funeral, I remembered that the payment deadline to the funeral home was approaching, and I looked at a document. Jake was busy with work, so I promised to handle the transfer for him. But Bob, not knowing this, saw me with the document, smirked and said, "So how long are you going to keep sleeping and avoiding your responsibilities? So, how much did you get from your mother's inheritance?" Those words took me aback. He said that without showing an ounce of concern since my mother's funeral. He probably thought about the inheritance because I was looking at the document, but that's just not acceptable behavior. In my listlessness, I replied, "About $1 million. Your $1 million? That's it." Bob muttered and grinned smugly. What a sickening smile. I don't know what he's thinking, but things aren't going to go his way. Without saying anything to Bob, I quietly put away the document. Seeing my silence, even Bob seemed to sense the mood. "Well, you've had a tough time. You should go to bed early tonight," he said. Umming from him, it felt less than comforting. I wasn't happy to hear it at all. In fact, it left a bad taste in my mouth. Not because Bob said so, but because I just didn't want to see his face anymore. So I went to bed early. However, something happened the next day. After breakfast, as usual, Bob left for work. Then I got a call saying he hadn't shown up. I was taken by surprise. This had never happened before. I feared he might have been in an accident and quickly called him, but there was no answer. I was restless, but when he walked into the living room, it all became clear. There was a contact number on the living room table. It was a contact of a lawyer who assists with divorce. Seeing that, I instinctively checked where I kept the documents. As I suspected, they were gone. Unbelievable. I muttered to myself. It wasn't an accident or an incident. Bob probably chose to disappear on his own. I remembered hearing some rustling in the living room that morning. Having stolen those items, Bob probably intended to start a new life, leaving me behind. The only reason he hadn't kicked me out all this, well, wasn't because he thought it was too late or anything, but because he was eyeing my parents' inheritance. The fact that he stole something was undeniable proof. Even so, I remained calm. Actually, there was no need to panic. I took the lawyer's contact and decided to call it. Bob had only himself to blame. I thought I'd make sure he learned that it's too late for regrets. I made sure to contact Bob's workplace. I haven't been able to reach him either, but it doesn't seem like an accident. I'll inform him to call back as soon as possible. I apologized for the inconvenience. I apologized like that. His colleagues kindly told me they'd consider giving him paid leave for the day. I envied Bob for having such a supportive workplace. It was originally a company my parents had introduced him to. I'd like him to be honest with his job, Bob's job, but soon he'll be a stranger to me. After that, I successfully contacted the lawyer and asked about the process. After enduring for so long, who knew I could be free so easily? I often think, if I had divorced earlier, maybe my life would have been different. It was when I went back home and was packing my belongings that my cell phone rang. It was from Bob, who hadn't answered any of my previous calls. I knew what he would say. Ignoring the call, I continued packing. However, he kept calling repeatedly. Finally, even the home landline started ringing. I assumed it was probably Bob, and because it was so annoying, I reluctantly answered. Hello. Visually saying so, I heard an anxious voice from the other side calling my name. Yeah, I called you. They said you didn't show up for work. Call your workplace now. That's not the point right now, I replied, but Bob didn't really listen to me. Interrupting my words, he exclaimed, I thought the document was a check from your mother, but it was not. I couldn't help but laugh upon hearing that. Finally realized, Tom, I can't help but think that way. He probably didn't notice because he took it in a hurry. Well, you've taken an invoice, not a check, and you burned a check from my mother that she gave me before she passed away. I was going to go through the process of cashing it and depositing it into our account. I what? Oh, don't you remember? It was in the bag for pottery class, I replied, chuckling. Bob seemed flustered. Then, what's this for? That's the invoice from the funeral home? You can clear that if you want. And remember, we still need to go through the probate process for your mother's account. After his mother passed away, I repeatedly asked Bob to do the necessary procedures. I tried going to the bank for the procedures, but they told me Bob may need to involve the probate process, and I was too busy to confirm it. So the account was left untouched with just a few dollars in it. Speaks about the invoice I was about to pay, and I kept it safe. You gotta be kidding. You should properly manage things from someone who's gone. You were the one who said you'd take care of your mother's affairs later. Don't blame others. So what am I supposed to do now? He asked. Well, nothing could be done with my mother's check unless I go to the bank for the procedures. We need to clear the invoice, and you need to check your mother's account. Bob grumbled in response to my words, but I didn't feel like replying and remained silent. To the people impatient, Bob seemed to have returned to the counter and appeared to be explaining the situation to the bank clerk. Seems like I accidentally burned a check. Can we somehow process this on her behalf? Look, I'm on the phone with my wife right now. It sounded like he was on speaker because I could hear the puzzled voice of the clerk too. I questioned what he was saying. Bob, what are you talking about? There's no way they'd let a stranger do that. Bang. And I've got in touch with the lawyer to process our divorce earlier. Thanks for getting nitty. Bye now. I said what I needed to and hung up. I'm sure the clerk heard my voice too. I wonder if Bob is pale or blushing right now. Just imagining it made me laugh. Well, I should leave the house before he gets back. Thinking this, I quickly packed my things. And then I left the house. I headed for my childhood home, which had been vacant since my parents passed away. Turns out, I had inherited that house too. My mother, who ran a business, had assets worth up to $13 million. But inheriting a lot of cash wouldn't do me any good with no children, and it would not end well if Bob found out. So I inherited just $1 million to ensure I wouldn't struggle with living expenses, and received the family heirlooms, such as my mother's preserved dresses and my father's antiques, which would fetch a pretty penny if appraised. Of course, I had the permission of my brother Jake. Jake had moved out after his marriage, and he was worried about the house being vacant since he had children and had taken over the family business. He even said he was glad that he only inherited cash. That's how we peacefully settled our inheritance. After arriving at my childhood home, I informed Jake about divorcing Bob and moving into our old house. If Catherine is going to live in our old house, I'll be relieved it won't be vacant. But are you really divorcing Bob? Are you sure about this? Yes. We don't have children, and both our parents are gone. If both of us want a divorce, it's for the best. I want to start my life over, and I have no regrets. Jake was concerned about me being alone, but being by myself is better than living as Bob's servant. Besides, if I can spend the last part of my life in the house where I grew up with my family, I'd be happy even if I'm alone. Bob kept calling me many times after that, but he seemed so disoriented that he didn't think I'd be at my childhood home, so he never came. I spent that day by myself. Although the house without family did feel lonely, I felt truly relieved deep down. The next day, I dragged myself out to resolve the issues. The invoice was with Bob. It was a bit of a hassle to go get it, but I decided to retrieve it. I decided to retrieve it at 6 a.m. when he would likely be asleep. When I got home, I was hit by the smell of alcohol as soon as I opened the door. It was so strong that I involuntarily wrinkled my nose. Entering the living room, beer cans were strewn everywhere. On top of that, the invoice was torn up and left on the table. That's terrible. No matter how angry he was, he had no right to tear up someone's invoice, especially since it was from my mother's funeral home. I picked up the pieces and put them in my bag. I also grabbed some clothes and returned to my childhood home. Then I headed to the bank, but I was stopped at the entrance. Entered Bob? To my surprise, Bob was lying in wait for me. I noticed the invoice was missing, so I figured you would show up. Perhaps whether I come here or not, it's none of your business. Come on, we've been together for so many years. Even though we had decided to get divorced, he had the audacity to say that. I ignored him and went into the bank. Even then, Bob continued to try to win my favor, but I staunchly ignored him. Then it happened. Bob, is that you taked? And Catherine? A voice called out to us. Mike, what are you doing here? It was Bob's younger brother, Mike. Both Bob and I were taken aback by this unexpected encounter. We mostly avoided Mike, only seeing him at funerals. I had been married to Bob for about 40 years, and this was probably only the third time I had seen Mike. It seemed he wanted to cut ties, but their parents had appealed to him emotionally, saying that if people found out they had been disowned by their son, it would be the end of their business. So he'd been asked to at least attend weddings and funerals. We had just met him a few years ago at their mother's funeral, so he probably recognized us from that. Yeah, I came from Mom's inheritance. I was checking the balance and was planning to get in touch with both of you. IP Pristinos? Bob's eyes lit up. I was also shocked. I thought there was only a few $100s left in the account, but according to Mike, there were also some old investments and a safety deposit box that their dad had rented. Mike had once heard about this from their mother. Before she passed away, she had reached out to him and said, if anything happens, you handle it. But he had been so busy that he only got around to it now. The thing is, Mike said, looking apologetically at Bob and me. Bait. Yeah, in the safety deposit box, along with some jewelry, there was a letter. Mom said she would leave all her assets to Catherine. 8. I was in complete disbelief. But Bob looked even more shocked. Mike took out the letter and handed it to me. Mike took out a letter from a folder he had. The envelope looked familiar. That's because I had bought it for their mother upon her request. Clearly written in shaky handwriting was, I leave the jewels from the safety deposit box and all other assets to Catherine. I could vividly remember their mother trying hard to write the letter. Do you need the letter? Should I bring it out? I had asked. It's none of your business, she had coldly replied. Perhaps she had been referring to this. I instinctively covered my mouth. Catherine, you took care of Mom all by yourself, right? She wrote how sorry she was for treating you badly. She probably thought if she told Bob, he'd try to cover it up, so she told me to handle it instead. Bob, sitting next to me, turned beet red and began shaking. Well, I never really intended to inherit anything. But since I'm a legal heir, I thought I should handle the paperwork. It's just going to be transferred to Catherine's name, so no big deal, right? Mike said casually. He probably didn't know we were divorced. Shortly after, I was called to the counter. Bob, however, seemed to have lost the energy to follow, despite not having any real business. He just sat in the lobby. That day, I managed to wire money to the funeral home and other necessary procedures. Guess I'll be heading out first. Take care, Catherine. I'll contact you again. Just leaving Bob, who stood beside him in shock. I safely returned to my childhood home. I got another formal message from Mike. It seemed Bob was like, that letter doesn't count. But Mike had persuaded Bob to understand the situation. However, Bob, not convinced, apparently went for a free lawyer consultation. Although my mother-in-law's letter wasn't accepted by Bob as a formal will, considering legal fees, He was advised it's better to settle things through discussion. Eventually, Bob agreed to inherit the house. The investments weren't that big, and he reluctantly gave up on jewelry and such. Then, I officially received my mother-in-law's inheritance. If Catherine gets my mom's inheritance, shouldn't I get a part of them and my mother-in-law's? That's how Bob challenged the lawyer. They told him it's a different matter. It was downright embarrassing. Despite being calmed down by the lawyer, Bob, still not satisfied, found out I was at my childhood home and came to our place. I was wrong. Let's start over. For realizing he wouldn't get anything, he apologized at the doorstep, wishing for our remarriage. There's no start over. There wasn't any love between us from the beginning. What's there to redo? For the first time, I conveyed my long-held feelings to Bob. Even Bob was at a loss for words. Damn. It seemed like he was finally regretting, and I couldn't help but smirk. At least you got the house, right? Oh, did you inform your workplace? If you're that desperate for money, work seriously. Should make sure you don't lose your job. I just told him that and closed the door. It's finally over. I have what was left behind by both mothers in my heart. With that, I believe I can live without any constraints in the future. In the end, Bob never informed his workplace, continued his unauthorized absence, and got fired. I had warned him. Just consider losing even his passion for work, which was his only redeeming quality. I wonder what's left for him. Thinking about it, maybe he was diligent in his work, not out of responsibility, but to maintain his dignity. Now with no one to show off his pride to, and no easy money he hoped for, it wouldn't be surprising if he lost his will to live. He was my companion for many years. I'm concerned, but that's it. I'm not going to help him out. I truly apologize for causing you trouble, Catherine, but only Mike apologized to me, knowing everything. He also told me that I wouldn't have to deal with Bob anymore. He probably noticed the dysfunctionality of that family early on, left home when he was young, and now he's likely living happily without involving his family in that mess. It seems Bob has become a recluse, but he's already at the age of getting his pension. He'll probably get by. If he was ready to say, let's start over to me, he should try to start over by himself. After that, I started attending pottery classes again. My friends were happy about my return. I never imagined that days where I can use time just for myself would be so joyful. I also met a wonderful person at the pottery class. I'm done with marriages, but I'm beginning to think that being with someone who loves me might be happier than being alone. It might feel too late, but just like when I got divorced, it's never too late as long as you're alive. At Shinoan, no matter the age, can be happy. That's what I believe. You are the ideal woman, for sure. If I didn't have a wife, I'd want to marry you, Betty. It looked as though my husband, John, was proposing to our eldest son's wife, Betty, right there on the bed. You can't do that. Though Betty appeared to be resisting, she was also getting closer to John on her own accord. I was shocked to see this unfold on my live security camera. I couldn't believe John and Betty were embracing each other in our bedroom. I'd always suspected something was going on between them because they seemed too close, but I never imagined I'd witness such a scene live. But then I thought to myself, I have clear evidence of their affair right here. So why not expose this video in a big way? My name is Patricia Johnson, a 55-year-old housewife. Currently, I work part-time a few times a week. My husband, John, is the same age as me and an office worker. We are high school sweethearts. It has been 30 years since we got married. We barely talk anymore. Whenever I try to start a conversation, John just grunts a short reply. It feels like he doesn't even look at my face anymore. He watches TV and eats in silence during dinner. My only companion at home is our pet Shiba Inu Carl. Carl is my cherished buddy. We have a son, Terry, who is currently 28 years old. Last year, he married a woman named Betty, who's a year younger than him, and they now live with us. Initially, I didn't expect to live with my son and his wife, but Terry said he wanted to stay at our home, so I agreed. It was mostly for financial reasons. While my son Terry has a steady job, it seems that lately, with overtime being restricted, his earnings aren't all that great. Considering the monthly rent, he mentioned wanting to save money by living at home for the time being. I was uncertain about living with my son's wife. However, even though it's just been the two of us, my relationship with John has been cold for a while. Maybe having others in the house might liven things up. Hoping for a better environment, I decided to move in with Terry and his wife. At first, after we all started living together, things were surprisingly smooth. Betty seemed to have a reserved personality, much like Terry. She was considerate, helping around the house, and was always pleasant to me. Things were going so well that I thought living together might not be so bad after all. But after a while, things began to change. John and Betty seemed to be getting unusually close. While Betty isn't particularly skilled in household chores or cooking and often says she lacks confidence, John always encourages her warmly. I've always lived with my parents, so I'm not used to making even simple dishes like beef stew. Do you think my seasoning is okay? Betty asked. For a beginner, it's pretty good. It's tasty, John replied. He never cooked a day in his life since we got married. Ever since Betty moved in, John has been coming home from work with a big smile on his face. Since home from work much earlier. He often brings home desserts and gifts she would like. Seeing them like this, I couldn't help but feel uneasy. On the other hand, Terry didn't seem to notice anything and acted quite indifferent even in front of Betty and John. As time went on, not only John but also Betty's behavior started to change. While she acted all sweet and helpless in front of John, she started to show a colder attitude towards me when we were alone. A text routine one evening, when it's just the two of us. I went to take a shower before Betty. Betty, I'm done with the shower. It's all your I said. I'd forgotten that I'd already told her once, so I accidentally repeated myself after a while. I get it. You don't have to tell me twice, Betty snapped at me. I was taken aback. Sure, it was my mistake for saying it twice, but she didn't have to be that harsh. She was never like this when she first got married. From that point on, I became a bit wary of Betty. Maybe she sensed how I felt about her. She started acting more and more condescending towards me day by day. I ended up taking on more of the household chores than before, while Betty just sat on the couch, constantly on her phone. I felt frustrated, but had no one to confide in. John really likes Betty, and Terry would definitely see me as an enemy if I spoke ill of his wife, Betty. Then, on a certain day off, John was eager to teach Betty how to make dumplings. Seeing John in such a good mood, I wanted to complain a bit. You've never made dumplings before, have you? Even when we said that, John just replied, quit nagging, and brushed me off. Well, let's start with getting the ingredients. Betty, are you ready to go? John asked. Yes, thank you, Betty answered with a big smile. John and Betty chatted and laughed, happily getting in the car and driving off. But John and Betty, they've been getting along really well lately, haven't they? I tried striking up a conversation with Terry. Yeah, I'd rather they get along than not. It's better for me, Terry replied, while glancing at his phone. He didn't seem to feel any particular way about it. Up 2 hours passed, and the two of them returned from shopping. It sure took them a long time, considering they just went to the local supermarket. I thought to myself, according to Betty, they took a break at a cafe during their shopping trip. Looking at John, he awkwardly avoided my gaze. The two of them seemed to enjoy making dumplings afterward. Betty was so close to John that she almost leaned on his shoulder. Every so often, Betty would touch John. John seemed completely smitten with Betty. Eventually, the dumplings were ready, pretty, and we all sat down to eat. Sorry, I don't feel so good. I'll pass. You guys enjoy. Saying this, I went to my bedroom and collapsed on the bed. I just couldn't muster an appetite. I hate to admit it, but I feel like I'm losing it out of jealousy. John and Betty are acting all lovey-dovey like newlyweds. I don't even feel like eating the food they made. I can tell that Betty is getting all cuddly with John just to spite me. Call it a woman's intuition, I guess. She understands that if she has both John and Terry on her side, she can have a higher position in this household than me. Like this, I slowly started losing my place at home. Living with my eldest son and his wife began as a way to save on rent. I suddenly thought, even though Betty is married, she doesn't have any kids yet. She's still young. If she wants to save money, why doesn't she go out and work? If Terry can't get overtime and earns less, why doesn't Betty work too? Even in my 50s. I'm working part-time, but Betty stays home all day. It seems like she just lounges around, watching TV shows she's recorded or on her smartphone. One day, I asked Betty in the flow of a conversation, "Don't you want to work or something?" Huh, Betty went silent, seeming taken aback. Immediately, John jumped to her defense. Hey, you don't need to say unnecessary things. It's enough for Betty just to be at home. And Kristen scolded me. Well, if Betty wants to work, she can, but if she wants to stay home, she doesn't have to push herself. Terry just gave his usual non-committal opinion. Just with both of them supporting her, Betty had a smug look on her face. I couldn't say anything more. Then, after some time, I got a call from Betty at my part-time job. Patricia, something terrible has happened. Terry had an accident at work and was taken to the hospital in an ambulance. Alert winning. I informed my workplace of the situation and rushed to the hospital. Terry was in the intensive care unit, looking nothing like himself. He was delivering products to a client in a company car. While on his way, a truck driver from the opposite side got distracted, crossed the median divider, and collided head-on with Terry's car. The other driver got away with minor injuries, but Terry was in critical condition, unconscious. Despite the doctor's best efforts, Terry never made it back. I couldn't believe that Terry passed away before me. The sudden turn of events was too much to believe. I spent the night crying by his side. Betty looked deeply shocked as well. John stayed by Betty's side, comforting her more than me. With no time to mourn properly, we had to start preparations for Terry's funeral. Usually, the main mourner should have been Betty, but she said, "I have no idea how to handle a funeral and didn't make any effort. You've got experience. Help her out," John instructed me. So I ended up handling all the arrangements and expenses for the funeral. On the day of the funeral, suddenly Betty got up from her seat and left. Maybe she rushed to the restroom, overwhelmed by tears. Then, perhaps concerned about Betty, John also left as if following her. Time passed, and there was no sign of their return. I thought about going out to check on them. However, with obligations to greet other attendees, I couldn't just leave my seat, but they sure are taking their time. I pulled out my smartphone, thinking about calling John. Checking the screen, I noticed a notification from my pet camera app. I was going to be out all day, so I turned on my pet camera. When my dog Carl stays home alone, I keep him in the bedroom. The camera captures the entire room, and I can see everything through the app on my phone. I wonder if Carl is okay. Since the morning chaos, I hadn't fed him or taken him for his morning walk. I opened the app to check on Carl in the bedroom. Despite being in the middle of a funeral, I almost screamed. Lucy was caged, barking as if he wanted out. Beside the cage, a man and woman were lying on the bed. I immediately stood up and rushed to the restroom with my phone. Taking a deep breath, I looked at the screen again. It was John and Betty on the bed. They were embracing each other, still in their funeral attire. My mind was spinning. Betty, who had left her seat crying, and John, who seemingly followed her. Why are they in our bedroom? But then again, the funeral venue is just a 5-minute drive from my house. It's not entirely impossible. I stepped outside to check the parking lot. John's car was nowhere to be seen. It seemed they had indeed driven to the house. I locked myself in the restroom again and checked the camera. Cara had stopped barking, and I could hear the two talking. John tenderly wiped away Betty's tears, touching her face. Surprisingly, Betty was smiling in response. "You really are lovely, Betty. Truly beautiful." John showered her with compliments. "Really? That's so sweet of you." Betty seemed genuinely pleased. She'd been crying at Terry's funeral just moments ago. "You're the ideal woman for me. If I didn't have a wife, I'd want you as mine." John seemed like he was proposing to Betty. "No, you can't." Betty showed a bit of resistance, but was also clearly drawn to John. "You do remind me of someone, Betty." "So much resemblance?" I said in shock. John and Betty continued their intimacy on the bed. I couldn't watch any longer, so I closed the app. I was feeling disgusted and didn't want to see anymore. When I finally left the restroom in a daze, I managed to get back to my seat. After a while, John and Betty returned to the funeral venue together. Both looked somewhat downcast. Betty's hair was a bit disheveled. To those around, it might have just seemed like a devastated wife, Patricia breaking down in tears and a kind father-in-law comforting her. However, knowing the truth, I was boiling inside. But all I wanted right now was to get through Terry's funeral. To trying to suppress my anger, I held it together. After the funeral, we finally headed home. John and Betty were seated on the living room couch. I immediately went to the bedroom to get our dog, Carl. "Carl, I'm sorry for keeping you locked in the bedroom all day." As soon as I opened the door, Carl bolted out of his cage. He wagged his tail happily at me and then darted into the living room. "Hey, what's gotten into you?" I asked, ignoring John's attempts to calm him. Carl made a beeline for Betty's feet. "Oh, what the heck?" Even as Betty shrank back, Carl jumped up at her, barking. The force knocked Betty to the floor. I was stunned by Carl's behavior. He seemed furious with the two of them. Thinking back, I remembered seeing on our pet camera that Carl had been locked inside a cage in the bedroom. The cage was from when Carl was a puppy, and we hardly use it anymore because he hates it. John and Betty probably caged him because he would be in the way when they got intimate. I'm sure they ignored Carl's barking. They might have let him out when they left the room, but Carl must have been upset with them for confining him in that tight space. Hey Carl, calm down. I'm going to feed you now, John tried to pacify him. But Carl, showing no interest, bit at John's foot. Carl doesn't particularly like John or Betty, who never take care of him. He probably can't forgive them for locking him in the cage he detests. Resamations. Hey, stop that. Don't come near me, Betty exclaimed, frightened as Carl growled and lunged at her feet. I'm the only one who takes care of Carl. Feeding, walking, everything. So he loves me the most. It seemed like he understood how John and Betty were hurting me and was attacking them on my behalf. Carl was standing up for me. This gave me the push I needed. I had saved all the footage from today's pet camera, perfect evidence of their affair. I wondered if I could use this somehow. I thought about it for a while, and after some time passed, we decided to hold Terry's memorial service at our house. Not only our family and relatives, but also Betty's parents are planning to come. For me, this is a golden opportunity. Everyone gathered in our living room where the memorial service took place. Afterwards, everyone started chatting loudly around the catered food. When everyone had finished eating, I stood up and began to speak. Thank you all for coming today for Terry's memorial service. I have something I'd like all of you to see today. Everyone became silent and focused on me. John and Betty looked stunned as I brought up something unexpected. I closed the shutters of the living room and turned off the lights. Even though it was daytime, the room went pitch dark. I pressed the remote for the projector I had prepared in advance. This projector was something John had bought a while ago, saying it's like watching movies at home. Although he hadn't used it much recently, on the wall of the dim room, a large video started playing. It showed John and Betty on a bed, flirting in funeral attire. Thanks to the projector, they were almost life-sized. Their intimate interaction was broadcasted loudly. Hey, what the hell is this? Wait, what's going on? John and Betty were completely shocked and panicking. The audience started murmuring things like, oh my god, what's this? And seriously, John and Betty, in their distress, stood up trying to block the screen from view. Both of you, sit down. You're in the way, I shouted at them loudly. The video continued to show their passionate embrace. Betty, this can't be real. What is this about? Betty's parents stared at her with a twisted expression. Ladies and gentlemen, this footage was captured by a pet camera I had set up in our bedroom. Hearing this, John muttered, damn it, he probably forgot about the camera there. If you look at the date and time at the bottom of the screen, these two snuck out of Terry's funeral service, drove back and did this in our bedroom. Hearing this, everyone gasped and exclaimed, no way, and I can't believe it. Hold on, there's a reason for this. I was really sad about Terry's death and was crying. John came to comfort me, and it just kind of happened. At that moment, the video reached a scene where she said, I've actually liked you for a while. I paused the video at that point. Did you hear that, everyone? Not only my husband, but it seems Betty was pretty into it too. Betty's face turned bright red from embarrassment. I pressed the play button again. While Terry's death was shocking, I always felt something was missing. I actually prefer men who shower me with compliments. So maybe I prefer you over Terry. Betty's voice played loudly, and everyone glared at her. There are such terrible women in this world. Ugh, it's sickening, I said, shuddering. Betty, I never knew you could stoop so low. It's truly pitiful. That's right. I can't believe she's our daughter. What an embarrassment. Betty was scolded by her parents and broke down in tears. Then John's voice could be heard from the video. You are truly the ideal woman. If I didn't have a wife, I'd want you as mine. Seems I'm just in the way for my husband. There's nothing sadder than that. Everyone gave John disapproving looks, and he cast his gaze downward in shame. I feel so bad for Patricia. Who knew John was such a terrible person? John received cold stares from all the women present and was sweating profusely. Then John's voice was heard again from the video. You really do resemble my first love. I pressed the pause button again. Everyone, Betty looks just like my husband's first love. But that's no excuse for him to make a move on his son's wife. John's face turned pale. I know about my husband's first love. We were high school classmates. I'd had a friend who had an older sister named Sophia. That Sophia was my husband's first crush. Well, it was just a one-sided love, though. John looked embarrassed as I revealed his past. I paused the video and displayed a photo on the screen. This is my husband's first love. The screen displayed a graduation photo of a young girl. She is a girl with neat braids. It was Sophia from her high school days. Upon close examination, there was a certain resemblance to Betty. And guess what? We have Sophia here with us today. Please welcome Sophia. Bait. John was so shocked that he couldn't close his open mouth. I turned on the lights, and the room brightened instantly. Suddenly, a middle-aged woman energetically entered the room. This was Sophia, John's first love. I knew Sophia's younger sister and had her contact, so after explaining the situation, Sophia said she'd love to meet John. Hey, long time no see. John, how have you been? As she said this in a loud voice, the large woman stood before John. The current Sophia was quite plump, reminiscent of a female wrestler. She looked nothing like she did in high school. Her voice was hoarse, probably from drinking. John was frozen in shock. Ah, Sophia. You mean you liked me that much, John? I had no idea. Why didn't you tell me? Sophia, now a bold character, made a grand entrance and left John dumbfounded. You made a move on your son's wife, just because she looks like me. John, that's just not right. Sophia said this and playfully slapped John's shirt. He staggered from the impact. Hey, I'm divorced and single. I run a bar now. Why not join me? John was forcibly hugged and swayed by Sophia. No, I'm married, you know. But Patricia already gave me the green light. She said she'd hand you over any time. Hearing this, John looked at me. While looking at Sophia, I nodded in agreement and said, exactly. I feel like throwing out this husband of mine right now. If anyone wants him, feel free to pick him up. Just then, Betty, who had been silently watching, suddenly spoke up. Wait a minute, John. Aren't you being a bit harsh? How do you Billy for you? How do you think I resemble this hefty woman? Bait me. No, she used to be really cute back in the day. I never thought she'd change so much. When John said this, Sophia hugged him tightly again and said, excuse me. It's rude to talk about someone like they're some kind of monster. We're both divorces, right? Let's try to get along. By the way, I've been looking for a new man. You do, John, want you? I spies bile. John could only shake his head in refusal. But still look anything like her. Betty was fuming. Shove it. Svark pranked her making a scene. Betty was scolded by her parents. And the reunion became total chaos. John and Betty were shunned by the family and promised not to have any more dealings with them in the future. After that, I kicked both John and Betty out of the house. I divorced John and sued both of them for the mental suffering they caused me. Betty's feelings for John cooled down and she started to resent him. Their relationship deteriorated quickly. Having been abandoned by her family, Betty wandered aimlessly. Being unemployed, Betty found herself suddenly living alone and applied for various jobs. But she couldn't get a good job as her interviews didn't go well. Now, she's working multiple part-time jobs day and night, living alone in a rundown apartment. As for John, his affair with his son's wife became public at his company. He kept companies. Due to the damage to his reputation and the loss of trust, he got fired. And now he's just scraping by, doing manual labor part-time jobs. Moreover, John has been receiving constant invitations from Sophia. That's the constant pestering is mentally wearing him out. Even though John was married to me, he always had a soft spot for Sophia since high school. But this unexpected reunion turned those sweet memories into a nightmare. As for me, without the stress of having John and Betty around, I'm living peacefully by myself. I can't help but feel sorry when I think about Terry. But if I keep dwelling on it, Terry won't be happy either. I've continued my part-time job and started a home garden, making sure to stay active. And most importantly, I have my buddy Carl. Going for walks with Carl is the happiest time of my day. It's me or taints. I hope to continue living fulfilling days in this house. Why are you here? Don't interrupt this important ceremony. Go home. Why is my husband marrying another woman? Why am I being yelled at to leave? Lo and behold, my husband is trying to have a ceremony with another woman. I barged into the venue. But finally, I lost my temper with my husband, who is determined to go through with the ceremony. Oh, really? Well then, let's liven up the ceremony since it's a special occasion. I turned back to the door and called for the people who were waiting. My name is Rachel, a 32-year-old working housewife. I've been married to John for 7 years, and though we've had plenty of fights, we've managed to make it through thanks to the presence of our child. But lately, things have been peaceful and the arguments have decreased. I suddenly realized why. That's right, the arguments have lessened simply because we've been spending less time together. I'm going to be late again because of overtime. And then I'll be gone for 3 days on a business trip starting tomorrow. Free again. You've been working hard recently? It's tough times. Gotta make money while I can. Never know when I might lose my job. Gotta keep at it. With that, my husband yawned and headed off to work. Is Daddy going to be gone again? Asked my preschool-aged daughter. Rubbing her eyes, asked, That's right. Daddy's busy. He's gonna be gone even on his days off. I can't help but think that it's a bit too much to be on a business trip even on weekends. But the fact is, he's working hard for the family, so I can't complain. With the economy being down, it's not easy to find a company that meets your needs if you want to change jobs. I know that because I'm working too. Mom's off tomorrow, so let's have lunch and go to the zoo. Really? Asked Worketians. My daughter's face lit up with a smile, and I smiled back. It's sad to think that he won't be able to witness her growing up because he's so busy. I thought I'd send my husband some pictures of our daughter while he's away. That night, my husband went to bed early, saying he was tired from working late. The next morning, he left early and he was gone by the time I woke up. I thought about how tough his job must be as I prepared the packed lunch. My daughter was thrilled to go to the zoo, and I got lots of great pictures of her smiling, so I sent them to my husband, but he was probably busy at work and didn't read them right away. It was read around noon, but there was no reaction, and I still hadn't heard anything by evening. I thought I might try calling him that night, but I forgot because of a phone call from a friend. After all, my friend's call was to announce her wedding, which was a very happy occasion. Is that so? Congratulations. I was invited to the ceremony, so I happily agreed to attend. My husband returned home from a business trip, and I immediately wanted to talk to him about it, but he responded dismissively. I'm tired. Can we talk about it later? It's understandable, though, since he's been working late nights followed by the business trip. He's bound to be tired. I apologized, but my husband silently retreated to his room. For some time now, we've been sleeping in separate bedrooms. I don't know what my husband is doing in his room. He might want some time alone, but isn't this a bit excessive? Coming home late at night due to overtime? Almost always away on business during days off? It's starting to seem suspicious. Should I inquire at his company? But I kept going back and forth about it, troubled day after day. Then one day, my husband was actually going to be home on his day off. Our daughter was thrilled. Daddy, play with me, she exclaimed, tugging at his arm. But he replied, Sorry, sweetie, Daddy's tired. And I'm still working, you know. You're just messing around with your phone, aren't you? He asked. I'm communicating with my work partner, he replied. Our daughter looked unhappy at his words. Well, who can blame her? I thought. My husband was lying on the couch, humming to himself while fiddling with his phone. Can he really be that cheerful while communicating with a work partner? My suspicions grew. This was now more than just a woman's intuition. I tried to sneak up behind my husband to look at his phone screen, but he cunningly held it at an angle where I couldn't see. That made it all the more suspicious. If there was nothing to hide, he could be more open. But that strange way of lying down, his neck must hurt, and who would hold a phone at such an angle? Suspicious, very suspicious. My doubts were turning into certainty, so I decided to confront him about it. Then to test him, you know, a friend's wedding is coming up, and since it's a day off, and you'll be off too, could you take care of our daughter? The wedding was far off, and I thought he could adjust his work schedule. Plus, it was supposed to be a day off from the company. But, as expected, my husband's reply was, even on my days off, I have work. You know that. Though there's no way he could be booked that far in advance. He always tells me at the last minute when he has to work on his day off, so it's clearly strange that he can't adjust his schedule now. What's more, my husband said, Why are you trying to push the kid onto me on my rare day off? You're a real she-devil, you know. Don't you think your husband should be able to rest? Isn't it precisely because it's a rare day off that a father should spend time with his child? He hardly ever spends time with her during the week or on weekends, and if he's unwilling to spend time with her even occasionally, I have to ask what kind of parent he is. Doesn't my husband find our daughter endearing? Both my daughter and I were saddened by my husband's cold attitude, and so it continued, with my husband rarely at home. He worked overtime until late every night. The next day, he left early for work without seeing our daughter's face. Of course, the weekends were spent working as well. At this point, he can't even be called a husband or a father. He is more like an uncle who only comes to visit once in a while. No, perhaps even less than that. This may require a serious talk. In the end, I had my parents watch my daughter on my friend's wedding day. So I decided to ask them to keep her overnight the following day. My daughter has stayed at my parents' house by herself before, so it should be fine. While she's away, I decided I'll sit down and have a serious talk with my husband after returning from my friend's wedding. Then came the day of my friend's wedding. The sky was clear, and the weather was perfect. I'll be going now. My husband left early in the morning, dressed very casually. He said it was okay because he was working on his day off, but was it true? Well, everything will be clear when we talk tonight. With that thought, I got ready, dropped my daughter off at my parents', and headed to the wedding venue. Oh, what a grand place for a wedding! The venue is large and magnificent, with several halls that could host multiple weddings simultaneously. At the main entrance, the names of the couples getting married today were written. There were 4 couples in all. I noticed that a couple's last name was the same as mine. It's an unusual last name, but not unheard of. I thought it was a coincidence and looked around. I still had some time before my friend's wedding, but I could see some familiar faces in the crowd. I could see some familiar faces here and there. As I approached to say hello, my friend looked at me with a slightly surprised face. Hey, you're early? What's up? Rachel, listen, about that groom over there. My friend's face went pale, and she pointed with a trembling hand. Looking up, I saw the couple getting married in the church where my friend was about to have her ceremony. The couple was showered with flower petals by the crowd. But then I thought, that face looks familiar. I'll meet John. From a distance, I squinted and then exclaimed in shock at the man at the center of the celebration. He didn't seem to hear me over the cheering, but I could hear the voices blessing the two. Among them was a voice saying, "John, make sure you make your wife happy." No doubt, the groom was my husband, John. What on earth is going on? We've been married for 7 years, haven't we? When did we get divorced? I didn't know. No, we didn't, did we? We didn't get divorced, did we? Did he file the divorce papers without telling me? Should I check for avoid divorce? Today's a holiday. Should I wait until the holiday's over? No, I can't wait, can I? That's definitely Rachel's husband, right? I thought he looked familiar. Just let me calm down for a second. Deep breaths are essential. Staying calm is vital. I won't be able to have a sensible conversation if I'm all worked up. By trying to keep cool while dealing with the fact that one half of the happy-looking couple was my husband. I tried to calm down, but couldn't at all. Well, of course, my own husband is marrying someone else. I can't calm down at all. In my exasperation, I almost tore at my carefully styled hair. My friend patted my shoulder, and the warmth of her hand finally helped me to think clearly. Nodding back at my nodding friend, I pulled out my cell phone. Once the ceremony was over, the reception would follow. The grand banquet hall was also home to the reception area. Looking at the sign at the entrance, I quickly found my husband's reception hall. I stood in front of the door and took a deep breath. Glancing back, I laid my hand on the door. I opened the door with a bang. At say even in the silence, all eyes were on me. The guests at the reception stared at me in astonishment. After a quick glance at the attendees' faces, I looked straight ahead. There, the couple was about to cut their cake. One of them, the groom, was looking at me with the most surprised face. Of course he would be, as the groom was my husband. My husband, John, seemed truly shocked. I silently approached him. Beautifully dressed, the bride and John were holding a knife ready to cut the cake. He was dumbfounded for a moment, but when I stood sternly in front of him, he finally seemed to snap to his senses and started panicking. What are you doing here? John, in a flutter, dropped the knife. Oh my, so much for the first joint effort of the newlyweds. It was the bride who spoke to the flustered John. "Gents Tutali, do you know this woman?" The beautiful young lady was probably younger than me, maybe in her early 20s. John, clearly flustered, answered, "Yes, I know her. I don't know her." "What on earth are you talking about? You're not making any sense." The bride's face showed her puzzlement at my husband's nonsensical statements. "It's in his haste?" John blurted out, "Actually, she's an old girlfriend I broke up with." "An old girlfriend?" It's actually, "Yes, my girlfriend before I met you. We broke up over personality differences, but she doesn't seem to accept it." She keeps following me around. Is that so? I was utterly astounded by my husband's ridiculous story. Poor girl, she believes him. Feeling sorry for her, I was then glared at by John, who seemed to have changed his expression. Hey you, we broke up a long time ago. You're disrupting an important ceremony. I'm gonna sue you later. Just leave now. The moment he yelled at me like that, my thin string of patience snapped. I'm the one who's gonna sue you, I said. Wait, what's with the mumbling? Just leave already. I'm the one who's going to sue you. Holding up, Earl. John must not have expected me to snap back. He recoiled at my sudden counterattack. But I did not let up my attack. If you want to have the ceremony so badly, I'll let you have it. But without your relatives, it'll be lacking in excitement. I yelled, and I looked back at the entrance of the banquet hall. That's why I invited your relatives. Right after my words, John was stunned, and the door banged open again, revealing Dad, Mom too. Yes, John's parents, and also Bao, my brother, my sister, and even my aunts and uncles. Yes, all the relatives. Why is everyone here? I invited them. As Troy, John turned pale and tried to grab me, but his father was faster and stepped in front of him. John, you fool! Rich pamictity. Wow, that punch from Dad looks painful. Just with unsympathetic eyes, I watched my husband's head get smacked. That's right, as soon as I saw my husband at the ceremony, I called his parents. Naturally, they were shocked. They came right away, with all the relatives. Wait, to Daniel's crib? Just listen to me, I pleaded. I won't hear it. Sit down, I'm going to lecture you. But this floor is hard. Just sit down. Yes, sir. His father's thundering voice was so authoritative. As he scolded my husband, I smirked at him and turned to the young woman standing beside me. She was still in shock, obviously the bride. I felt sorry for her but had to explain. Nice to meet you. I'm John's wife. Wait, wife? I think the bride, who had been staring at John, in shock, turned to look at me. She's really cute. Just the type that John likes. By the way, I have an ordinary face. In terms of the difference between ideal and reality, I am the reality, and the girl in front of me is the ideal. We've been married for 7 years and have a child. Chnus Perforni? Heading to the disbelieving bride, I showed her our wedding pictures. My in-laws had brought them for me, and then I showed her the pictures on my cell phone. A photo of John holding our daughter as a baby. I don't have any recent pictures since John's never around. The bride stared at the pictures, dumbfounded. She must have known nothing. So how did you and my husband meet? I asked her. He was a regular at the coffee shop where I worked. It seemed she worked at a coffee shop. John often went there to drink coffee. He asked me out. John asked her out. That was clear. He said the reason he was still single at his age was because he was destined to meet me. Yes, husband, I caught you in a big lie. He always came home after work, and we always met on weekends. He often took me on trips. Oh my, the evidence is everywhere, isn't it? So you were lying about working late and going to her house. He was meeting her on the weekends. I want to sue my husband. Can I have that evidence? She readily agreed to my brazen request. All right, I've got the evidence. She persisted. Now I can move forward with an advantage. Well, with all this evidence, I can surely get a divorce without any problems. My husband is continuously being nagged by my scary father-in-law. He's sobbing, but he has no right to cry. I bent down beside my sobbing husband and put my hand on his shoulder. With tears in his eyes, he looked up at me, making a truly pitiful face. Rachel, I'm sorry. I really wanted to have a wedding with her. She said if I don't marry her, she'll leave. Whatever. Just divorce me. I really didn't care, so I just nodded and said that to him. Then, my husband's eyes widened in shock. Wait, that's what surprises you? Divorce? No, I wasn't planning on going that far. What are you talking about? Having a ceremony like this? Do you think you have the right to refuse? I don't even want to call you by your name anymore. Since you've been cheating, I want the property settlement and also child support, all paid in one lump sum. No, I don't want a divorce. What the heck are you talking about at a time like this? What's wrong with this guy? I can't forgive him as my husband or as a person. It's not just about me. You left our daughter alone, and now you say you don't want a divorce. Women don't need someone like you. Just marry someone else. No, it's not like that. Excuse me. I don't know what he's thinking, but my husband was crying and saying he didn't want a divorce. As I was coldly responding, I heard a small voice. I was looking over. I saw the bride, who was looking down and hiding her expression. It was her. Samantha, no, it's not like that. I truly love you. Rachel kept refusing to divorce, and I couldn't get divorced easily, but I really wanted to marry you. Hold on, didn't you just say you didn't want to divorce me? He probably doesn't even know what he's saying. Basically, he's saying he doesn't want to divorce me, but he also wants to marry Samantha. Are you an idiot? Before he could say that, my father-in-law said, "Are you an idiot?" and slapped his son on the head. Yeah, well done, father-in-law. Ah, that's enough. The one who said that, having seen it all, was Samantha. Babe. My husband asked, tears in his eyes. She turned her icy, cold eyes on him. I don't want to marry you. Babe, I'm calling off this wedding. Thankfully, we didn't get the marriage license yet. And besides, you're already married. Bigamy is illegal. No, wait, Samantha. I love you. What about your wife? Fun. Oh, Rachel? I don't love Rachel. Bait. When Samantha asked about me, my husband was about to say he didn't love me, but I glared at him and he changed to, actually, I do love her. What's wrong with you? Man, you idiot. It's not me this time. The one who yelled you idiot was Samantha. She finally snapped. I can't forgive you for proposing to me while you're married or for betraying your wife and child. And then saying you love both of us and want to marry, but don't want a divorce. What do you think you are? I'm sorry. You don't have to apologize. I'm going to sue you. Bait. This is clearly fraud, isn't it? Any marriage fraud? No way. Wait, Samantha, eyes bear off. My husband is clinging to Samantha's dress. And what's more, he's reaching out to me with his left hand while grabbing the dress. Seeing this, I looked to the side. Samantha was looking at me too. We exchanged glances, nodded simultaneously, and grabbed the husband's hand. Together, we pulled him up and shoved him away, shouting in unison, "Are you an idiot?" With a dumb cry, the husband crashed into the cake. But after that, we apologized profusely to Samantha and those involved for ruining the ceremony. But they thanked us, saying they were glad to have been told. They were nice people. Then, when he was hesitant about marriage, I thought something was strange. But when I suggested that if we couldn't get married, we should break up cleanly, he finally agreed. I wondered what he was planning to do after the wedding ceremony and registration. Samantha said, "Really? I thought it was strange that he didn't want to invite relatives. He said he wasn't on good terms with them and didn't want to invite people from the company either," Samantha added. Yeah, it's weird that there were no guests from the husband's side. Samantha ended up getting a settlement, along with compensation for the husband's actions. It's been a good lesson in life. I want to be more careful in finding a decent person next time, Samantha said, smiling brightly, hinting at her strength. I'm sure she'll have a wonderful encounter next time. As for me, I had to apologize to a friend for not attending her wedding. But my friend sympathized with me and assured me that our friendship would last forever, which was a relief. Naturally, I divorced my husband. He was adamantly against it, but when I said, "He who chases two hares catches neither," he gave in. I didn't understand why he was so against divorce, but I concluded it must have been because I had an income, since my ex-husband's savings were all gone. It seems it wasn't a good idea to think that he was taking care of the mortgage, given that I had a job with a decent income and never received living expenses from my ex-husband. My ex-husband had poured all his remaining salary into his girlfriend. Well, that's why he lied about being on frequent business trips and was actually going on vacations. Money can disappear in no time at all. Well, I'm not going to be lenient about the division of property and child support. I'm not allowing any installment payments. His parents ended up covering the money. Just as under the strict supervision of his stern parents, my ex-husband is now scrambling to repay them, working his original job and taking on a night shift as well. Just rumors of his sleazy behavior have spread at work, and he's treated with disdain. Female coworkers even avoid getting close to him. Well, let him suffer. That's what he deserves. Life for my daughter and me hasn't changed much since the divorce. My ex-husband was rarely home, so it's only natural. Without a lazy father lounging around. My daughter seems livelier, don't you think? I'm style, watching her grow up healthy and cheerful. I can't help but laugh, thinking I must be careful that she doesn't end up with someone like her father in the future. My name is Sarah. I have a husband and a 1-year-old child. I married Thomas shortly after we found out I was pregnant. In other words, it was a shotgun marriage. Before marriage, I worked at a clothing manufacturer. Since I was a child, I've been interested in fashion and loved choosing outfits, so it was a dream job for me. Thomas worked at an event company in the same building as mine. We'd occasionally run into each other in the elevator, until one day, Thomas asked, "Would you like to grab a bite sometime?" Thomas was tall, well-dressed, and quite handsome, so I was over the moon when I said yes. After a few dates, we began seeing each other. With Thomas working at the event company, he often had to work on weekends and holidays, so it was difficult to spend free time together. But every moment we got together was exciting. Thomas always dressed stylishly, and his fashion sense was just my taste. Looking back, I, who didn't have much dating experience, was head over heels for Thomas. Having him by my side felt like enough. So when I found out I was pregnant, I was overjoyed. And I thought there was no happier thing than this when Thomas proposed to me. But looking back, it wasn't the beginning of our happily ever after. It was the start of some hard times. After getting married, we moved into a condo. Well, it wasn't upscale. It was a 3-bedroom unit, modernly renovated, and I absolutely loved it. Life in our new home was joyful, and Thomas always seemed to enjoy the meals I made. While Thomas was still swamped with work and often wasn't home on his days off, he was kind when he was around and often took care of me, making me feel cherished. By the time spring rolled around, I safely gave birth to a baby boy. Thomas seemed extra happy that it was a boy and would take pictures of him daily, showing them off, hoping he'd grow up to be kind. Kind-hearted, we named him Anthony. However, during his 3-month checkup, we found out he had a heart condition. Even though I had arranged a flexible work schedule after Anthony's birth, his frequent hospitalizations made it difficult for me to continue working. So a few months ago, I officially quit and have been a full-time homemaker, supporting my husband and child. However, lately, I've noticed a change in Thomas's behavior. He used to be quite hands-on with chores and child-rearing, but since I stopped working, he stopped helping entirely. Even though I'm a stay-at-home mom, Anthony still can't walk at one, and with his frequent physical therapy appointments at the hospital, I don't have a lot of free time. I felt Thomas was spending less time with our child. My anxiety mounted more than ever. Thomas, I understand that you're tired from work, but I wish you'd play with Anthony a bit more. Play. He can't even stand up yet. I told you Anthony's development might be slightly behind. You used to help with things like changing diapers, remember? It just feels pitiful looking at Anthony. No one in my family ever had a weak heart. What do you mean by that? Look, now that you're a homemaker, you should handle it. I'm swamped with work right now. With that, Thomas, looking annoyed, quickly headed to the bedroom. That's no way to talk. I couldn't accept what Thomas was saying, but I reconsidered, thinking maybe he's been getting home late and is just stressed from work. Maybe I should have seen Thomas's true feelings then. Ever since I became a homemaker, our income has decreased, so I've been careful with our expenses, but Thomas has been spending money left and right. We were reaching a point where we'd have to dip into our savings. So I made a suggestion to Thomas. How about we move since the rent for this condo is quite high? I don't want to. I like this condo, he replied, not even looking away from the TV. I get it. I love this place too. But we're in the red every month. Let's find somewhere cheaper. It's because you quit your job, right? You can always put Anthony in daycare and get back to working. I wonder what he was talking about. Just the other day, Anthony had a sudden health scare and was rushed to the hospital. There's no way I could leave a child in such a condition in daycare. Thomas, do you understand Anthony's condition? We need to save money for his sake. Actually, there's a place with cheaper rent near the hospital. It's an older 2-bedroom apartment, but I think it's enough for the 3 of us. After enough with Anthony, stop making everything about him. His sudden outburst took me by surprise. We can live because I work every day. I'm not going to move to some rundown place. But if we keep this up, I'm in a bad mood now. I'm gonna go out for a drink. Thomas left, slamming the door behind him. Anthony started crying at the sound of his father's shouting, and tears welled up in my eyes too. Did I really do something to deserve being yelled at like that? Thomas used to be so kind when we got married. But ever since he found out that our child had developmental delays and a weak heart, he has become increasingly distant. To me, no matter how Anthony is, he is a precious being that I truly love. It saddened me that my husband, Anthony's father, didn't seem to feel the same way. As I comforted Anthony, he shifted from crying to smiling in my arms. Seeing Anthony's innocent smile always calmed me down. I made up my mind. I'll think of ways to earn money while taking care of Anthony. I won't bring up the topic of moving again. I started making and selling handmade accessories and trinkets. I've always been interested in crafts and was quite handy, so when I began selling using online apps, they became quite popular, selling out quickly. At first, it was just a bit of pocket money, but gradually, as I gained customers and started taking orders, I began earning as much as someone would in a part-time job. Thomas seemed to think of it as just an extension of my hobby, but working while looking after Anthony was quite challenging. Still, I was able to save up little by little, which gave me a sense of stability and boosted my confidence. One day, as apple trees started to bloom, Anthony began acting strange. I thought it was one of his usual episodes, but he wasn't focusing and didn't respond when I talked to him. I panicked and called an ambulance. Inside the ambulance, holding Anthony's hand, I kept saying, "It's going to be all right, Anthony. We'll be at the hospital soon." But he barely reacted. However, I thought I heard a faint mommy from him. But by the time he was taken to the hospital, he was in cardiac arrest. They started CPR immediately, but it was in vain. My little Anthony had passed away. He was just 15 months old. After losing Anthony, I felt empty. I didn't feel like doing anything and didn't want to meet anyone. I couldn't accept the fact that Anthony was gone. Although Thomas shed tears for Anthony's death, by the next few days, he was living as if nothing had happened. Seeing my deep sorrow, he said, Anthony had been ill since birth. Maybe this was his destiny. I know, but I still can't believe he's gone. We'll probably be blessed with a healthy child next time. I hope it's a boy again. I looked up at Thomas, shocked. His insensitive words deeply hurt me, making it seem like Anthony never existed to him. Thomas, I'd like you to be thinking about Anthony right now. What gives? I'm fed up with your "I'm the only one suffering" attitude. I too dreamt of playing with a healthy son. It wasn't supposed to be like this. What do you mean? To be frank, Anthony has been a burden. It might have been better this way rather than having that situation last for so many years. I couldn't believe my ears. Was he really the kind of person who could say such cruel things so casually? Sure, there were many challenges with Anthony, but I'm grateful that he came into this world. I just hope you never forget our beloved son. I honestly conveyed my feelings to Thomas, but I doubted if my words reached his heart. I'm going to sleep now. Talking more will just tire me out. And with that, Thomas quickly retired to our bedroom. After that, I often felt downcast and unable to keep my spirits up. I didn't feel like resuming the sale of my handmade crafts, just managing the bare minimum of house chores. Seeing me like this, Thomas became even more irritable. Gradually, he started coming home late and often dining out without informing me. I felt our marriage slowly cooling down. Even though I knew this couldn't continue, I couldn't bring myself to take any action. Eventually, Thomas started saying he was on business trips and began spending more nights out. I've been assigned to events out of state, he'd say, but I had a bad feeling. And that hunch was spot on. One day, a woman named Jennifer visited our home. Thomas was at work that day. Are you Thomas's wife? Yes, and who might you be? I work at the same company as Thomas. Oh, a colleague then. Yes, and I'm also dating Thomas. I'll get straight to the point. I want you to break up with him. You've been neglecting Thomas, haven't you? I heard you hardly cook for him, and there's no communication between the two of you. If you don't love him, I want you to leave him. Hold on a second. This is the first time I'm hearing about you two dating. It's not like I can just say, "Oh, all right," and agree to break up. Can you please leave for now? When he's about to be taken away, you suddenly become desperate, huh? But Thomas loves me. He even said he's been doing well in his job because of my support, and that includes support in his personal life. Apparently, he feels irritated being around you. Why did I have to be told such things by this woman who suddenly appeared? Trying to suppress the rising anger, I looked straight into Jennifer's eyes and said, "Please go home." Jennifer seemed like she wanted to say something else, but reluctantly left. Later that night, when Thomas came home late again, I confronted him about what happened earlier. What's going on? Are you dating Jennifer? We're not dating. She's just a junior colleague at work. We just went out for dinner a couple of times. You've been getting support from Jennifer in your personal life, haven't you? That's why you've been coming home late lately, isn't it? Quit nagging. You're always moping around at home and won't do a thing, so don't act all high and mighty. I was taken aback and stared at Thomas. Without meeting my gaze, Thomas opened the fridge and took out a can of beer. Ignoring my presence, he turned on the TV and started drinking. I was too shocked to say anything and just stood there. A few days after the incident with Jennifer, I received an email from my best friend from college days. It was an invitation from Margaret to reunite with our college classmates who had majored in fashion design. Back in college, it was a time filled with dreams and hopes. Since my relationships with these classmates, all of whom had studied fashion design, were different from my other friends. They were the ones with whom I could truly be myself. Maybe I should go. But on the other hand, most of my classmates had made it big in the design industry. I felt too broken and embarrassed to show myself in front of them. While I was lost in these thoughts, my phone rang. It was from Margaret, the friend who had sent me the email. "Sarah, it's been a while. Are you okay?" Hearing those caring words from my best friend after so long, I felt she truly understood my current state. "I'm not sure if I'm okay," I said, tears welling up in my eyes. "I'm off today. Can I come see you?" Infuriating, I was overwhelmingly happy, feeling the love and concern from my best friend, who was ready to be by my side immediately. "I wanted to see you too." Within an hour, Margaret was at my house. Then I told her about the passing of my beloved son, Anthony. "I didn't know. You haven't changed, still keeping all the pain to yourself." "It must have been tough, right?" "Sarah, you really did your best," Margaret said as she prayed in front of Anthony's memorial plaque and photo. "He looks so happy in this photo. Feels like he's saying thanks, Mom, to you." Hearing those words, my tears just wouldn't stop. On the last day, when he was rushed to the hospital, I felt as if Anthony, unable to speak, maybe he was trying to thank me back then. I told Margaret about it and sobbed uncontrollably. Throughout, Margaret gently rubbed my back until I calmed down. After crying my heart out and calming down, we reminisced about the good old days. I dreamed of becoming a top-notch designer. It felt like we were back in those fearless days. So, about the upcoming class reunion, we've decided to get together with the crew we always hung out with. Back in our college days, Margaret, I, and 3 others ran an online store. We even had our own brand name and made decent sales. But as we started our jobs, we all chose different paths and decided to close our online store. Now, most of us have reached a point in our careers where we feel certain limitations in our organizations. That's why we're talking about reviving our brand. Really? That's awesome. But can I be a part of it? I'm just a stay-at-home mom, you know. What are you talking about? Weren't you selling handicrafts up until recently? That's the spark. Everyone knows, Sarah, you've got a great sense of style. You had customers coming in quickly, and we were all wondering why you stopped recently. It sort of made us feel nostalgic, I guess. Seeing my handicraft sales, Margaret and the others were reminded of the passion from our student days. That's why they felt the urge to seriously start up our brand again. Apparently, that's what the reunion was about. If you guys are okay with it, I'd love to work hard alongside everyone again. Hearing me, Margaret gave a gentle smile. It had been a while since I felt this positive. Afterwards, we steadily prepared and launched our brand. See, Margaret and the other 3 have worked in renowned design firms and in the fashion industry. We all had our own collections, and our brand made a grand debut. When I started the new venture, Thomas seemed uninterested. But when our brand started getting media attention, he changed his tune. "You must be making a lot more money now, right?" he asked. "I was thinking of getting a new car. What do you think?" I replied, "I'd rather not spend recklessly since we've just started and it's still unstable. Plus, we've only had the current car for 3 years, haven't we?" But as usual, he snapped, "Don't act so high and mighty. You have all this because I've been supporting you." However, his words didn't shake me as much as they used to. I felt like I was slowly finding myself again. But an event occurred that plunged me even further into the depths of despair. At least, the day before Anthony's first death anniversary, Thomas suddenly had a business trip and said he couldn't make it. "What do you mean? It's an important day, isn't it? Couldn't you have changed your plans?" he asked. "Rent a trip for a day like this? It's a project I'm in charge of, so of course I can't. Besides, let's just drop it. I want to get about Anthony. Go visit the grave by yourself, okay?" I thought he was the worst. Abseil, the trust between us as a married couple had been crumbling for the past year, but today's words made something inside me snap. "I understand. I'll go alone. I'll take care of your important matters alone, too." Thomas looked puzzled but left hurriedly, as if feeling guilty. Thomas was not on a business trip. It was a trip with his lover, and the partner was not Jennifer. Fed up with Jennifer, who was pushing for marriage, Thomas had found a new girlfriend. I saw it all, but it was thanks to Margaret. A few months ago, when our brand started, Margaret brought up something important. "Sarah, do you know about Thomas's affair, and can you forgive him?" "I know about it. A woman named Jennifer came and yelled at our house once." I answered, looking down. "It's not that. Actually, Thomas's event company had a deal with my former workplace, so I know Thomas's immediate boss well. Thomas is a natural womanizer. He even had a girlfriend when he married you. Not Jennifer either. He'd been flirting with that girl for a year. She was serious, so her heart broke and she couldn't come to the company anymore. Fucked her people. Indeed, Jennifer was a cute woman, but she seemed serious. I'm sorry, actually. I've known about this since the beginning of your marriage. The boss was worried about you, and I thought Thomas must be up to something, but I never thought he'd be such a scumbag. Sarah, maybe you should live your life the way you want from now on. It's strange coming from me, who's not even married, but Margaret, thank you. If it wasn't for you, I might not have recovered yet. I'll take your words to heart, and I'll decide what to do for myself. At that time, I firmly believed that I wouldn't look down anymore and would keep moving forward. That's why that day was the last chance for Thomas. I hoped that if Anthony felt the same way as his son, we could have another talk. But Thomas wasn't feeling that way at all. He even wanted to erase his memories of Anthony. That's why I decided. Actually, Jennifer was not convinced at all and was preparing to sue Thomas for sexual harassment. I intend to assist Jennifer as a witness. I also made up my mind to divorce him. Once the facts are clear, divorce will be inevitable regardless of his intentions. I held a memorial for Anthony's first anniversary while he was away. I wasn't alone. All my coworkers, including Margaret, were there. I attended. I'll never forget this favor. Then I packed my belongings and moved into a secure high-rise apartment that Margaret introduced to me. I got several calls from Thomas in the next few days. I ignored the first 10 calls and answered the 11th. What's going on? I haven't heard anything about a divorce. Oh, you're back. You have a partner, so it's just right, isn't it? That's not the point. Jennifer is suing me for harassment, and it's causing a mess at work. Can you help me out a bit? I thought he was terrible to the very end. With no regrets, I said sorry, but I'm going to help Jennifer, not you. Do you realize how many women you've hurt? Probably not. I don't think we'll be speaking directly anymore. Goodbye. But I could hear Thomas shouting on the other end, but without hesitation, I hung up. Later, with testimonies from my coworkers and I, Thomas had to pay Jennifer the compensation. It goes without saying that several women followed Jennifer and filed suits. Thomas had no choice but to resign from his job. But now, he's working at a convenience store and apparently paying off compensation to those women. Such is the fate of a man who selfishly hurt women. Isn't the baby adorable? Yeah, looks just like you. Excuse me? My sister Jessica has always been quite the looker in our hometown. She played sports and was always the tomboyish type, running around the playground with the boys, sporting a short hair, and compared to me, she had fair skin and was delicate, looking lovely in a white summer dress. That's why every boyfriend I ever brought home during my school days ended up having a crush on Jessica. It wasn't Jessica's fault, it was mine for not being captivating enough. While it got me down, it also pushed me to better myself. Finally, when I managed to marry, my husband George didn't really give any special reactions upon seeing Jessica. That's why I believed he was different. I thought I could trust him. But betraying me, great and forgivable. Furious, my actions led to both of them losing everything, plummeting into a world of My name is Natalie, 33 years old. I married George, who is 2 years older, 3 years ago, and we've been living together since. Growing up, my dream was to become a homemaker once I got married. However, after graduating from college, I joined a company where I was surrounded by supportive bosses, kind seniors, and cute juniors. The environment was so welcoming and the job was rewarding, so even after marriage, I've been working full-time. George was very supportive of me working, saying, "Let's both do the house chores whenever we can." He was very cooperative at the beginning. At the beginning of our marriage, George was not very cooperative. He had always lived with his parents before we got married and had never lived alone, so he had zero housekeeping skills. He would often knock over the trash can while vacuuming, put too much detergent in the washing machine, and break more dishes than he cleaned. His knife skills were also very poor, making it painful to watch him cook. Initially, I would try to teach him how to do chores together, but because I also had a job, things would take longer when he did them. As a result, I often ended up doing them myself. Every time, George would give me an apologetic look and say, "I'm sorry." But eventually, this became the norm, and cleaning, laundry, dishwashing, and cooking all became my tasks, while all George did was take out the trash. And even then, I was the one tying up the garbage bags. I also have a full-time job, and sometimes I am too overwhelmed to handle all the chores. But whenever I would ask George for help, he would make a face and say, "It's faster if you do it." I would retort, "But you could at least help with the laundry, right?" Today, like every other day after a full day of work, I returned home to find George lounging on the sofa watching TV. Our work hours are not much different, but George's workplace is closer to our house, so he usually gets home first. The laundry I did in the morning was still in the dryer, and the dishes from breakfast were still in the sink. I hadn't had time to do the dishes before leaving for work, and George didn't seem to have noticed. I started by cleaning up the dishes and then preparing dinner. All the while, George just watched TV. So when I asked him to help with the laundry, he seemed hesitant. "It's just folding the laundry," I said. He replied, "He just can't do that simple thing." Or rather, he probably doesn't want to do it because it's a hassle. I sighed softly and continued to prepare dinner without emotion. It seems like George's attitude is getting worse day by day. It's now a given that he doesn't do his fair share of the household chores. Even though the burden has become heavier on me, is it too much to ask for a simple thank you for chores, and he's increasingly going out alone on his days off? Don't you think we should spend some quality time together, just the two of us? I'd suggest. But his responses were always along the lines of, "I've got golf with my boss that day," or "A colleague wants some advice about work, so I need to go." He always seems to have some plans. At 35, George, with no particular high-ranking position, honestly doesn't earn a great salary. I once accidentally saw his paycheck, and it was much lower than mine. But the fact that he's often invited out by his superiors and colleagues probably means he's well-liked at work. I know very well that connections and relationships are crucial in one's career. So when he cites that as a reason, it's hard to ask him to prioritize me. I also didn't have the courage to quit my job and become a full-time housewife. Before we knew it, 3 years had passed since our wedding. I've always wanted to start a family, soon after getting married. My feelings haven't changed, and I've brought up the idea of having children with George several times. However, he always said he wanted to cherish our time together more, and wasn't very keen on the idea of starting a family just yet. Well, I understood and respected his sentiments. It hurt that he'd spend his free days away from me. I tried approaching the topic again, wanting a child sooner rather than later, but George gave vague and non-committal responses. I started to wonder if he's not really fond of kids. The thought made me feel down. At times like this, a change of scenery helps. Thinking of maybe catching a movie, a message notification from Jessica, my older sister by 2 years. Pop, she wanted to meet and chat. Meeting her after so long seemed refreshing, so we quickly agreed, and we decided to meet up at a diner near the station the next day. Jessica arrived a bit later than planned, apologizing as she took the seat opposite me. "It's been a while. Have you been?" "I'm good, how about you?" "I'm doing well, too." And with a smile, Jessica said, "Sorry for calling you out so suddenly. It's okay. I'm happy to see you after so long. There's something I wanted to tell you, Natalie." "What is it?" "I'm pregnant." "Bait," I exclaimed louder than I intended. Fixed remembering only after that we were in a public place. I quickly covered my mouth with both hands. Seeing my reaction, Jessica laughed. "You're too surprised." "But Jess, I didn't even know you had a boyfriend." I mumbled. With a slightly troubled look, Jessica replied, "Actually, we're not married yet. He's got some complications." Jessica looked down with a saddened expression. Jessica had always been the beauty of our hometown, famous enough to be recognized by many. As a child, she was active, playing sports and running around with the boys in the park. Compared to me, she was fair-skinned and delicate, looking like a girl who would look pretty in a white dress. Now, she jumps between various temporary jobs. She would always joke about not wanting to be a permanent employee because office romances always messed up her relationships. Maybe that was the issue here. "Are you happy about the baby?" I hesitated before asking. Jessica smiled and nodded. Because of course. Whatever the situation, it seemed she had made up her mind to be a single mom. Natalie, as Maui, will you support me? No matter the circumstances, if Jessica wants that child, there's only one thing to say. With that said, and a smile, Jessica gave a relieved grin. It would be great if you, Natalie, could have a baby soon too. I couldn't bring myself to tell the blissful Jessica that I was currently having doubts about that very matter. I just gave a vague smile and responded, yeah, maybe. That day, as soon as I got home, I told George about Jessica. My sister is pregnant. Wow, really? We'll have to bring a gift when the baby is born. I had intended to share the news as something significant, but George's reaction was much more indifferent than I expected. Even though George knew Jessica wasn't married yet, he didn't seem to show any interest or ask any questions. Or maybe he just isn't interested in kids. I couldn't consult with Jessica, and my feelings of unease only grew. Time passed, and I received a message from Jessica saying she had safely given birth. When I told George, all he said was a simple, "Oh, really?" Maybe if he actually sees the baby, he might want one of our own. With that thought, I suggested visiting Jessica in the hospital. She's going to be in the hospital for a while, and I really want to see the baby's face soon. Plus, we should bring a baby gift. All right, I'm free this Saturday. I can come. Really, I'll let Jessica know. And with Jessica's approval, George and I planned to visit her with a baby gift the following Saturday. The next day, wondering what would make a good baby gift, I tried to search on my phone, but the battery had just died. I'd left my computer at work, so I had no choice but to use George's. Heading into the bedroom where it was, I thought about letting George know, but he seemed to be napping on the couch while watching TV. It's just a quick search, I thought, and continued to the bedroom. Upon starting up the computer, something astonishing caught my eye. Maybe it was set to start automatically, but without me touching anything, an email folder was open, and it contained a recent conversation. All with Jessica. Beamed. Why? It made sense that George, being my sister's brother-in-law, would have some interactions with Jessica. They probably communicated sometimes, but what could they be discussing this frequently? Curious, I clicked on the most recent conversation. Congratulations on the birth. I'm really sorry I couldn't be there. So I'm finally a dad, huh? Thank you. It came out easier than I thought. Can't wait to introduce him to his father. What is this? It was unbelievable. I couldn't understand. He apologized for not being able to be there. Is he the father? This implied that the child Jessica gave birth to might be George's. In a frenzy, I looked through their past emails. What did you tell her today? That's just mean. This was from the day Jessica told me about her pregnancy. I'm pregnant. Probably from the last time we met. I'm super thrilled. And this seemed to be from when Jessica found out about the pregnancy. I'll be over there today. Told Natalie I'm playing golf with my boss. Okay, want to try that restaurant we talked about. The further back I went, the more it looked like a conversation that couldn't possibly be between a sister's husband and her brother-in-law. It seemed their relationship started right after George and I got married. I felt a mixture of anger and despair as my hands trembled. I can't believe it. Trying hard to shake my shocked brain, I think about what needs to be done next. Then I made sure to put George's computer back the way it was, so he wouldn't find out I touched it. When I returned to the living room, George was soundly snoring, asleep without a care in the world. I clenched my fist tightly. I'll never forgive you. I whispered quietly, formulating a plan. Then on Saturday, George and I went to the hospital where Jessica was admitted. Jessica seemed quite well. You didn't expect him to be out and about so soon. I wanted to say, but trying to put on a smile, even though I'm a bit annoyed. On Jessica's arm, a newborn baby slept peacefully. The baby was innocent. That's why even in its cuteness, I shot George a scornful look. I could feel my blood boil as George looked at the baby with joy. The baby is so cute, George murmured affectionately. Yeah, looks just like you, I replied. George and Jessica froze. I smirked with a sly grin. Then, upon seeing their reaction to my words, both of their faces drained of color. You thought I didn't know? Jessica played dumb, tilting her head and asking, what are you talking about? That you two are having an affair? And who the real father of this baby is? George raised a voice. What the hell are you saying? Jessica just gave birth. Don't make wild accusations. It's not an accusation. I have all the evidence, I said, handing George an envelope as if throwing it at him. Surprised, he took it and checked the contents. It contained excerpts from emails between him and Jessica, hinting at their relationship. I copied the data from George's computer to mine and read everything. "You went through my computer," he shouted. I wanted to see what gift to give Jessica. "There wasn't even a password, and your email app popped right up," I said. Might be hearing about George's careless security. Jessica clicked her tongue in disbelief. Real, according to the emails, it all began when George came to my family's house to announce our marriage plans. Of course, he met Jessica there and fell head over heels for her. But George, being on the brink of marrying me, couldn't do anything about his feelings. So he went ahead and married me, but his feelings for Jessica never faded. Surprisingly, Jessica later joined George's company as a temp worker. Though she was only there for 6 months, it was more than enough time for their relationship to deepen. He'd make excuses like, "I have a golf game with my boss," or "A coworker needs work advice and I need to go." But in reality, he was meeting Jessica. Eventually, they crossed a line. "I didn't want to," Jessica said, "but George forced me." As I summarized what I learned from the emails, Jessica's face turned into that of a victim. "But the child is innocent, so I decided to keep it," she added. "Why are you making things up? Wasn't it you who seduced me?" George shouted. "It's not like that, right, Natalie? You believe me, don't you?" Jessica looked at me desperately. I replied flatly, "Why would I?" In her college days, I often consulted with Jessica about my relationships. Every time I got a boyfriend, Jessica was genuinely happy for me, but they never lasted long. That's because whenever I introduced a boyfriend to Jessica, he'd inevitably fall for her. I fell for Jessica, so having someone tell me upfront that they wanted to break up with me because of her was one of the better scenarios. There were even those who tried to get close to Jessica by using me as a stepping stone. Ditched a pair. Each time that happened, Jessica would look apologetically at me, but it wasn't her fault. It made me wonder if I lacked charm, or if I needed to make others fall for me so much that they wouldn't be tempted by Jessica. That's when I met George. Even after George met Jessica, all he said was, "She's a pretty lady." His attitude towards me didn't change at all. That's why I married George. I thought he'd only have eyes for me and wouldn't be swayed by Jessica. But the reality was, he just hadn't encountered Jessica until we were too deep into the relationship, so we ended up getting married. It's like nothing had changed since our college days. Actually, back in college, I could trust in Jessica's kindness, so I might have been happier then. "You purposefully stole my boyfriends, didn't you?" "No, I didn't. It's all here." I showed her the printed out copies of their email exchanges. "I've always stolen Natalie's boyfriends." That's such a nasty habit. Then Natalie comes to me for relationship advice. Comforting her really boosts my ego. I can't stop. That was the truth. Jessica would steal my boyfriends on purpose and comfort me when I was down, all to boost her self-esteem. I thought she was a supportive big sister. I believed she was a kind sister I could share highs and lows with. And then I handed George the lawyer's business card. "Hold on. I expect the division of property." "Jessica, I've told everything to our parents. They're going to disown you." "Wait a minute. They won't see their grandchild then." "Even if Natalie and George break up, who's gonna want a plain divorcee like you? They both prioritize me." They told me not to worry. Seems they don't want to see the face of their disgraceful daughter more than their grandchild's right now. Jessica gritted her teeth at my words. Then she turned to George. "Hey, you're the father of this child. You'll pay child support." That was the deal from the beginning. George remained silent. Given his modest salary, he couldn't possibly afford to divide the property with me and also pay child support. He probably thought he wouldn't get caught and was relying on my salary for living expenses. But now with the double punch of the division in child support, he was in a tight spot. No wonder he stays silent. "From now on, we'll communicate through our lawyers." This is ridiculous. As I tried to leave, George began tearing up the printed emails. Of course, I still have the data on my computer and had already provided it as evidence to my lawyer. They're probably verifying the authenticity of those emails right now. But judging by their reactions, it doesn't seem like it's some kind of fake email. I eventually divorced George and moved back to my parents. Seeing me, both of them were in tears. For them, Jessica was their beloved daughter as well. And of course, she was a sister I loved dearly. I never thought she'd play me like that. My parents disowned Jessica. She tried to rely on them using her child as leverage, but they never gave in. It seems like Jessica and George didn't end up together. When I caught them, Jessica tried to shift all the blame on George, and he couldn't accept that. In the end, Jessica couldn't raise the baby alone and had to place it in a temporary care facility. Rumors circulated at the office that George was having an affair with Jessica, his wife's sister. Feeling uncomfortable, he reportedly resigned from his position. He's tried to reconcile a few times, saying he's sorry, but there's no way I would accept it. I had to get a restraining order through the police. Bangwitty, now I won't have to see George's face ever again. Meanwhile, I've become even more dedicated to my job than before. People were quite concerned about me at first, but I seem to have gotten over it and have been working hard. Looking at me, it seems the morale in the office has also improved, and sales have apparently skyrocketed. I think I've had enough of marriage, but it's not the only thing that brings happiness. I have a rewarding job, a trustworthy boss, dependable colleagues, and loving parents. Right now, I feel more than fulfilled. I hope the days continue to be this calm and peaceful.